going to go ahead and get started. Hopefully we are able to dial in and we've enjoyed a wonderful, beautiful day outside and sitting back and relaxing, and we can listen and learn a little bit about sustainable landscapes. My name's Chris Enroth. I'm a horticulture educator with the University of Illinois Extension, and I work out of the Macomb, Illinois office, and I do serve McDonough, Warren, Henderson, and Knox counties as Unit 10. And my background's in landscape design, landscape architecture, and this is a really fun topic. And there are so many things that we can really talk about when it comes to sustainable landscaping. We're really just going to scratch the surface here, and we still got a lot to talk about though tonight. So let's go ahead and get started. The first things that you want to consider when you are developing a sustainable landscape, it would be, what are your goals? And it's always a good idea to set out with goals. That way your landscape doesn't turn out looking, as an afterthought. Maybe you have ideas of sustainable practices that you want to do, but if you don't think of those up front, if you don't have that as a goal up front, sometimes they can think of afterthoughts. And as an example, like solar panels on the south facing side of a building where you also planted an oak tree. So just thinking and doing a lot of forward planning and having some goals. And so everybody's goals are a little different, so I just wanted to share with you some general broad goals out there. These are ones that I can, that I really kind of sympathize with and I feel. So the first one is to reduce or eliminate inputs. And that is really almost the definition of a sustainable system, whatever it is. And I would have to say, as far as landscapes go, it looks almost impossible to me to completely eliminate inputs to create a purely sustainable landscape. However, I think that there are steps that homeowners can take to reduce the amount of inputs, the amount of energy that goes into the landscape. If you want to think about, inputs and outputs of a landscape, just imagine your yard as a piece of energy, and however much energy you put out is as much energy that needs to go into it. And so for sustainability, we don't want a lot of external outputs or energy going into our yard. So that's just kind of the key tenets of sustainability. The next one is benefiting wildlife and promoting ecosystem services. We're going to talk a lot about that later on tonight. And then the goal of promoting human benefits. And perhaps, for me, a good sustainable landscape is one where, I get more of a well-rounded experience when I'm in my yard or within a certain landscape. And so, everything from the psychological to the physical health benefits that humans have. Now, there are several reasons that I'm going to present to you why sustainability is important, and it's time for this conversation. So the first one is, it is really a trend of the public and profession. We're seeing a lot of folks there requesting fewer chemicals used in their yards, and they want perhaps lower maintenance yards, which translates into maybe a bit more of a sustainable type yard. The other thing, though, is also that as far as the profession goes within the green industry and design, there are surveys of landscape architects that specialize in residential projects. They're seeing a huge uptick in the amount of clients that are requesting sustainable components to be integrated within their landscapes. And so it's become a really big driver for the green industry. And so this is why green industry advocates, namely American Society of Landscape Architects, Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center, and the U.S. Botanic Gardens have come together to develop the Sustainable Sites Initiative. Now, if anybody there, and if you're at home or if you're sitting with an audience, if anybody there has heard of LEED, that's L-E-E-D, it's Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Now, that is a program committed towards sustainable buildings, not necessarily sustainable sites. They do have a component in LEED that goes into the site design, but it's fairly weak. And so what this group did here is they came together to form their own version of LEED, but instead of the building, it's essentially everything outside of the building. And they call this a Sustainable Sites Initiative. And you can get your site certified, just like you can get buildings certified with LEED. And they follow a very similar structure like that. It's a really neat system, though, and you can always go online and check it out later. The other one out there, and this is the big buzzword, is climate change. So what is climate change? Well, if you think about how much, our atmosphere, we learned when we were kids in school, like the composition of atmosphere, it's mostly nitrogen and oxygen. And then we have these trace gases out there, and one of those is CO2. Now, CO2 accounts for about 0.03% of our atmosphere. That's 0.03%. However, that small amount attributes significantly to the greenhouse effect of our planet to be warm. Without that CO2, we would be a much colder planet. I believe when I did a little looking here, it attributes about almost 60 degrees worth of warmth for our planet. So without CO2, just imagine today, but 60 degrees cooler. So it's very important in that very small amount in our atmosphere. You can see how, if we add more, a little bit goes a long way. And so just as an example here, we're going to leave the backyard right now, and we're going to actually leave the planet. We're going to go look to our sister planet, Venus. Now, millions of years ago, Venus had water on its surface. It had an Earth-like atmosphere. But something happened to precipitate warming on the planet, and scientists really aren't sure. They think perhaps it was the gradual warming of the sun, but something happened, and CO2 really started to become very prevalent in the atmosphere, and it really hit this tipping point, and Venus hit this runaway greenhouse effect. And what happened is it literally boiled the water off of the planet's surface. And being Venus, even though it's second from the sun, it is actually the hottest planet in the solar system at just a balmy 900 degrees Fahrenheit. So that just goes to show, how potent CO2 can be. Now, if we go back to our backyard, back to our home planet here, now, nobody is predicting a runaway greenhouse effect like Venus. Earth is a different type of system than Venus. So first of all, we have a living system, one that can respond to different changes and other things that nature throws at it. So Earth is a very dynamic system, and I'm not suggesting a runaway greenhouse effect, but and scientists really aren't quite sure what's going to happen in the far distant future. But there is one thing that we are certain of, and that is it is getting a little warmer out there. So what does that mean? What does climate change mean for us gardeners? So let's kind of go back in our own backyard, and obviously, yeah, it's getting warmer out there, so we're looking for a little bit of shade out there. But one big thing, I remember where I grew up, where I used to live. I lived in Zone 5A. Now I live at that same location. It is Zone 5B. So what has happened, the USDA has had to alter its cold hardiness maps to adjust for a warming, annual minimum temperature. So all the gardeners, I'm sure you're all thinking, you're clapping, you're applauding, you're like, all right, I can grow all of these plants that I wanted to grow down south. We're so jealous of everyone. If you're down there in southern Illinois, your southern magnolias and your crepe myrtles and everything, oh, we want those up here. But guess what? With those great plants comes all of those wonderful pests that they have to deal with all the time in the South. So, and it's an adjustment in our whole, natural areas, our plant communities, and the wildlife communities all have to make this adjustment, and it's happening really quickly. And things change all the time on Earth. The issue here is just how quickly it's happening, and how slow nature usually has, or the time nature usually has to respond to such changes, and it doesn't have the time this time. The other thing that is becoming attributed to the climate change, scientists are, they are linking these extreme weather events. Now, if I think back to our drought we had in 2012, and that image there on the left side of the screen, that is very, that just brings that whole summer back, and then we had that quasi-drought the next year, and plus the drought that's been on out west. Or also, if we go to the flip side of the coin, we're seeing more and more storm events that have a bigger punch, upfront punch, and then less of that very gentle, day, 2 day long rainfalls. We're seeing these really heavy storm events that happen all at once. Where does all that water go? Well, it mostly just sheds and runs off. So we're seeing two flip sides of the coin here as far as severe weather events. And scientists, they are beginning to attribute and show evidence that these two things are linked. The other thing here, and it's the pink elephant in the room, fossil fuels. We know that this is something that needs to be addressed. We all do know that. But it's just so hard to address when so much of our modern lives depend on this finite resource. So, as a gardener, I just suggest maybe start thinking about ways to incorporate renewable energy into your landscape. And actually, an interesting statistic that I have sitting right here in front of me is that garden equipment engines have been unregulated as of late, and they actually do emit high levels of emissions. And actually, an older gas-powered mower emits the same pollutants as 43 cars being driven 12,000 miles per year. Now, there's been new standards enacted, so newer models actually only emit 11 times more pollutants than a brand new car. So it's very interesting to think about that. So, go back and look at your old maybe Ford or Kubota mower in a different light now. And then we also have the issue of water. Now, there are a lot of talks and a lot of motions out there to thinking about feeding the world. Great thing, something that we really need to talk about. But there is another element out there that we need almost more than food, and that is water. And so the thing about a sustainable landscape, I just want to put this in your mind, is that if you adopt some of these practices that help to better manage water on your site, then you actually will be helping to protect our valuable water resources, which are becoming more and more limited. Sorry about that. I'm just muting some background noise there. All right. So the other thing about sustainability and its importance is think about wildlife habitat. And I'm sure we're all thinking about this. We got hostas or something in our backyard, and Bambi's pretty happy in our backyard. I don't really think we need to worry about all of this wildlife going on back there. But I want you to maybe close your eyes and think about those satellite photographs of the North American continent they take at night, and you see all the lights of the cities. Now, when I was a kid, I always imagined, the lights, that's where people are. But the dark, that is where wildlife is. That's where nature is. That's where the wilderness is at. However, if we take a look at the aerial photographs taken during the day, we notice that those dark areas on that satellite photograph, they actually have been converted from these natural areas to a majority of them have been converted to agriculture to feed those bright points on that map, or to provide that energy on those bright points of that map. So a lot of that dark space, there it is being used to supply the developed areas. So there's a lot less wildlife habitat than in the 50s. Back then we had the hedgerows and everything between fields. Now some areas still have some of those, but more and more those are being taken down and they're just being put into production. This can be a problem because those were valuable wildlife corridors. And so it's really important to start thinking about, if we can't supply this in these dark areas, what about our backyards? Well, the development patterns for most residential areas these days, the conventional, idea or model is this, the postage stamp lot. And this has been very popular since probably around the late 40s. And this kind of gets everybody their own little slice of nature, but where is the habitat here? Where's really the nature? The really only habitat I see in this aerial imagery is for Japanese beetle grubs and lawnmowers. You got a little bit up there in the upper left-hand corner for some Canadian geese, but there's really not much habitat. And this is just one shot, one little slice of a very large pie. And so thinking about development patterns and how we have, sprawled out over the landscape with our suburbs is another critical component about wildlife. So when we think about sustainable landscaping, we might have to just go back and say, well, what is sustainable? And to me, and maybe something I'd like for you to also have in mind is that when I say sustainable, maybe a good term to pop up in your head is resilient. A sustainable landscape is able to overcome the swings in extreme weather, perhaps the inattentiveness of the gardener, or just perhaps some type of shortage of material or something happens in that nature. The landscape is still going to be there and still going to be able to function. It is going to be resilient. And so to me, in my mind, a sustainable landscape is a resilient landscape. So there, like I said at the very beginning, there are a lot of things that we could talk about tonight. And so I really kind of had to narrow it down to really these 4 topics. And the first one is soil. Then we're going to talk a little bit about sustainable lawns. And then we're going to hit water. And then finally, we're going to delve into sustainable plant practices. So let's get right into soil. Now, the thing about soils is if you have a healthy soil, it does a great job. It absorbs rainfall and helps to mitigate flooding. It's able to infiltrate that water as opposed to shedding it off on the surface. With that comes the process of removing pollutants and cleansing water. It's able to store water that the plants use, wildlife use, that we use. It also provides habitat and stores carbon. Soils are literally alive. If you have atmospheric monitors out and you watch the graphs and tables of the composition of the atmosphere, you can see when the soil inhales and exhales, so to speak, on a seasonal basis. The other thing is that healthy soil is critical for sustaining plants, and plants play a huge role in our civilization, in our life, because they provide us food. They give us fiber for clothing, timber. We use lots of medicine based off of plants, and a lot of other goods come from plants. And where do plants come from? Well, they come from an association with the soil. So I'm going to go through just a string of problem soils. Now, you might be encountering these types of soils in your landscape. Now, I know if folks that are there in the Illinois River Valley, I was there in Peak not too long ago, and I saw a home under construction. And that home site looked like that place was built on a beach. That soil was so sandy. And so that just goes to illustrate. Now, where I'm at, though, is a very heavy clay soil. So Illinois has a very wide variety of soils. Now, majority of the time, the questions I get in the office, someone's dealing with a clay soil. But, we still got those sandy soils out there, so I want to include those. But I'm going to go through these really quick. And you don't have to necessarily write everything down that I'm saying, because you're going to start to see a common theme between each one of these soils and what we should do to help deal with them. So first one, sandy soils. First thing we do, we grow plants that are adapted to sandy soils. The other thing we can do is we can then incorporate organic matter. The thing with sandy soils, they drain so quickly, they don't hold much nutrients, they don't hold much water. If we incorporate organic matter, that allows them to hold more water, add a little bit more nutrition. We also then recommend mulch your planting beds to help insulate that soil. And then also grow green manures, which you can then till in and add, again, more organic matter. And then we come to wet or poorly drained soils. These could be, slow spots in your yard that, though they don't drain or dry as quickly after a rain event, they're still damp a few days after the rains move on. So for these soils, again, let's grow plants that are adapted to these wet soils. And again, we are going to incorporate organic matter to, if there's a drainage problem, then maybe the organic matter will help break up those soils to promote drainage. Maybe we should just avoid those soils altogether and build a raised bed, grow on top of them. And then another thing for, specifically for wet or poorly drained soils is taking that rainwater, which might be flowing off of a roof, driveway, sidewalk, wherever, and diverting it, throughout your garden. You can utilize rainwater harvesting techniques like rain barrels, or you can then infiltrate it into the soil by constructing rain gardens or installing bioswales. And we're going to talk talk all about these things in the water section. And then clay soils, pretty much the most popular one. This picture is taken down in beautiful southern Illinois, where you have that beautiful red clay. Right? Yeah, beautiful. But anyway, yeah, this is the type of soil where, again, you just grow plants that are adapted to it. And you can help to break up that clay soil by incorporating organic matter. Of course, again, we go in, we create raised beds, grow on top of it. We mulch clay soils. Now, I really notice this a lot with our clay soils where I'm at here in Macomb, is that we have a lot of shrink and swell. And this is partly due to the moisture in the soils and the amount of moisture plants are pulling out of it. So it's a good idea if you mulch the clay soils, it insulates it. And so the temperature swings, the moisture swings, the soil's not shrinking and swelling as much, which can be detrimental to the foundation of like a home. So mulch is critical for clay soil. And then minimize practices that might compact soil. The main one I'm thinking about is working the soil when it's wet. So if it has rained a little bit maybe a day or two ago and you go out and you want to either plant just a shrub or you want to till your garden bed, the thing you need to do to see if that soil is dry enough to work is reach down and grab a handful of that soil. If it crumbles in your hand, it could still be damp, but if it crumbles nice, loose crumbles in your hand, then it is ready to be worked. But if that soil is just turns into this kind of mud ball that rolls around in your hand, it's still too wet. And so when we work that soil when it's wet, it just creates this glaze, this clay pan, and it actually makes problems worse. So let the soil dry out before you work it. The other thing is our acid or alkaline soils. If we have, either swings of the pH scale. Again, the thing here, grow plants that are adapted to whatever the soil's pH is. Good reason to go get your soil tested. Extension always recommends having your soils tested, and it's a really good practice to follow. Maybe not on an annual basis, but every 2 to 3 years, it's a good practice. And then incorporate organic matter. Again, organic matter will serve as a buffer to some of these, perhaps pHs that are a little bit out of whack with the rest of the surrounding area. And then, of course, when all else fails, grow in raised beds. Don't even grow in that soil. Avoid it. And then saline soils, salty soils. Now, this is something you would typically encounter if you lived on the coast. However, I do see a lot of salt damage after, a particularly harsh winter, especially 2014. That was a really tough winter. So a lot of plants suffered from salt damage. So what do we do here? Well, I usually recommend if you have an area that typically sees the salt or snow being deposited on that corner or whatever, I usually say it's probably not a good place to grow anything. It's a good place for ornamental rocks or something like that. But if you do want to have plants there, then grow plants that are salt tolerant. And then the other thing is you can, once again, incorporate organic matter to act as a buffer to those salts, and then, of course, mulch the gardens, which will then decompose and add more organic matter to the soil. And we have shallow soils, and these are typically areas where your topsoil is very, very shallow, very rocky, very gravelly. So what you can do is you can grow plants adapted to these rocky habitats. You can, once again, incorporate organic matter or avoid it and garden in raised beds. So has anybody picked up on these common themes here of how we treat our soils? The first one, embrace your soil. It's a whole, it's a 12-step program of acceptance. And after that, you can then embrace your existing soil by selecting plants that are adapted to grow in. And that's the key and critical thing. And then incorporate or mulch with organic matter, some organic-based product which will break down over time, and add that to your soil. And then, if all else fails, avoid your lousy soil altogether and just grow on top of it in some type of a raised bed. And finally, I just want to if you have a healthy soil and you want to protect it and encourage a healthy soil food web, then limit soil disturbance. If you don't have to till, then don't. Tillage does break up the texture of the soil, the structure of the soil, and so excessive tilling can be detrimental to the soil. restore overly compacted soil. Some of us, we don't really have a choice. We come into a situation, a home's been built, and there's nothing but nasty subsoil. So that means you'll have to come in with some type of compost, topsoil amendments, till that in, and try to get that soil back up into shape and kind of reactivate it. Regularly apply compost or organic mulches. Avoid pesticides that might harm soil biology. Plant a diverse garden where different plants can take advantage of different nicks and crannies in your soils. Grass cycle, which is simply leaving clippings lay on your lawn. We'll talk more about that later. And then composting. Composting, it's a great thing to do, whether you're composting your yard clippings or you're composting your vegetable scraps. It's a great practice to do. Now let's get into sustainable lawns. This is a very big buzzword. A lot of maybe companies are out there saying, hey, we do sustainable lawns, or a lot of homeowners are saying, I want my lawn to be more sustainable. So the first thing, let's look at this is how sustainable is the conventional lawn. Now, if you want a lawn that is, the talk of the neighborhood, like everybody drives by your yard and they say, wow, that's a nice lawn, then you probably don't have a sustainable lawn, because to get that, usually you are hiring out maybe some type of a lawn care company, or if you're pretty savvy with it, you're doing it yourself. But it requires, again, a lot of those external inputs coming onto your property to create this, very rigid, manicured appearance. And so how sustainable is the conventional high-quality lawn? Not very much. But there are recommendations that Extension gives, and these are just cultural recommendations that you as the homeowner can do yourself that will make your lawns more sustainable. Like I said, there's no such thing as a purely sustainable site, but there are steps that we can take to lower the amount of inputs that we do. So what does Extension recommend? And these recommendations, they will give you a well-established, functional lawn that you can use, but it might not necessarily be that lawn that everybody drives by and talks about. Maybe you have 80% good quality turf, and maybe 20% of that is dandelions. It's all up to the homeowner in kind of how you base your own ornamentality of the landscape. But these are Extension's recommendations here. First one, select the right turf species for your site. If you're growing Kentucky bluegrass in the shade, you're going to be struggling, and maybe you're going to have to keep throwing fertilizer and overseeding and some type of fungicides and things like that at the lawn. It just struggles and struggles and struggles. Well, maybe if you selected the right turf species, so a fine fescue works very well in a somewhat shady situation. Now, a fine fescue, pretty much any lawn grass, requires a minimum of 4 hours of direct sunlight to be really successful. So if you get less than that, a good option would be perhaps instead of turf, mulch, or some type of a shade garden, understory planting, something like that. Mow to a height of 2 to 3 inches. This is most of these recommendations are based for cool season grasses. Cool season grasses really like a mow height of 2 to 3 inches. It allows them to keep a good ratio of above ground growth to root growth. That allows them to compete with weeds, and it's a really good climate setting to put on your mower there. Never remove more than 1/3 of the leaf blade at any one mowing. Now, I say this is kind of the one that's easier said than done because it all happens. Sometimes the lawn gets away from us. But if you remove more than 1/3 of the leaf blade, just know that you really run the risk of stressing out your lawn because you're really cutting off a lot of that food supply that the grasses use to feed themselves. Those leaves, they are those little solar panels, and they create their own food. The nitrogen that we all put on our lawn, that's just to stimulate certain processes within the plant. Plants make their own food. Also, grass cycle. We mentioned this a little bit ago. Leaving your lawn clippings lay. As I mentioned, nitrogen is a critical component for lawns. And what we found out is that lawn clippings, they don't actually contribute to thatch issues. Thatch is actually more related to management of the lawn. So what happens with clippings is about 90% of those clippings are comprised of water. The rest of that, the 9 to 10% remainder of those clippings is nitrogen. And so if you fertilize your lawn 3 times a year, you can actually, there's enough nitrogen in those clippings, you can cut out one of those feedings, one of those fertilizer events. And so leaving your clippings laid back on the lawn is a great practice. Obviously, if you get any clumps, anything like that, you want to spread them out, rake them out, or throw them in the compost. Fertilize, hollow tine aerate, establish new lawn or overseed a lawn. These are great practices to be done in the late summer, early fall. You can hollow tine aerate right now for where I'm at here in Macomb. The cool season grasses are actively growing. They're green. We're mowing them, so it's a good time to hollow tine aerate. You're not going to hurt anything by coming in and overseeding, but just know that if you overseed in the spring, the soils are cold coming out of winter, which is why coming in after the summer, the soils are warm. You're going to get better germination. You're going to get better results. And fertilizing, you know, if you only do it once a year, I really do recommend that one time is the late summer, early fall to pick up our cool season grasses after a harsh summer. And then finally, if you're going to be watering your lawn, make sure that you water deeply and infrequently. Most conventional lawn sprinklers, they typically are set up on timers that are too short to apply enough water, and plus those sprinkler heads, they apply water too quickly, and a lot of that water winds up running off your lawn. So just make sure that if you can reduce your flow rate on your sprinkler heads or overhead sprinkler, whatever you're using, and then just water deeply but infrequently. You know, once a week is sufficient if we don't get adequate rainfall. And I want to let you know that lawns are important. I really love a good, well-established lawn. They are the most economic, aesthetically pleasing ground cover that we can have. And it's very important in terms of design. So if imagine the wall, you know, behind the computer screen or the monitor that you're looking at right now is this beautiful shrub border, all kinds of colors and textures and forms. The brain gets a little tired after a while of seeing that, and we need to let our minds rest. And so that lawn is a great void in our spaces that we create in our backyards to allow us to rest our brain, our eyes. And also lawns are a great place for social activity. Can you imagine a barbecue get-together without a lawn? I mean, where else would it be? In the middle of a dirt field or in the middle of a baking hot asphalt parking lot? So lawns are really important for our communities. It's a really important thing. However, the sustainability movement, we are moving a little bit away from the conventional sprawling lawns, and so a lot of homeowners, they're looking for alternatives, either for smaller lawns or no lawns. So let's look at that latter one here first, and the first one is lawn free.
Oh.
So that first one here is lawn free, and as you can see here in this photograph, this homeowner has no use for a lawnmower. Front yard is pictured here, the backyard also, no lawn. And this is one where I think it's really well done. I've seen some lawn-free yards that are not particularly well done. They could be more described as just kind of a weedy mess, maybe the neglect of the homeowner there, but this is really well done. They use a lot of low input shrubs. This is actually taken out in the more arid Kansas out west, and so less water out there. They're using a lot of creeping junipers. They require less water. They have a lot of other sustainable practices out there, such as a bioswale and permeable pavement. We'll hit those here in a bit, though. So there is just the entire lawn free, no lawn at all. And then we also have, I'm seeing more and more of these come on the market, no-mow lawns. So this is at the University of Illinois campus in Champaign-Urbana. This is their fine fescue plots. And as you can see, this might not be something for everybody. As a designer, I really find this attractive, and I think it would work well in certain areas of the yard. The next slide here just kind of gives an example, maybe what parts. So the photo there on the left, maybe the no-mow area, that's a fine fescue right there, no-mow fine fescue mix. Maybe that'll work good up against some type of a meadow or prairie. Sort of in the background or in the midground. The foreground is the nice manicured lawn, the midground is the no-mow lawn, and the background is some type of a natural area. The other photograph here, the larger one, is a buffalo grass, and this is buffalo grass edging a rain garden. So it worked really well, knitting the soil together and reducing the amount of erosion, slowing the water down as it entered the rain garden. We also have meadow lawns, and for me, meadow lawns, it's essentially those images you saw prior, except we have started to layer in ornamental plants, and they could be natives or non-natives. It doesn't matter. So the photo on the left is a buffalo grass kind of meadow, and the buffalo grass serves as this canvas, and then the designer then comes in and or homeowner comes in, they dot in all of these ornamental grasses or perennials, annuals. The photo there on the right is, I believe this is probably just like a Kentucky bluegrass lawn, which they have then come in and they've just layered in shrubs, looks like boxwoods, some lilies, some alliums, and various plants. And so that's just kind of the idea of it. It's a quasi meadow lawn, but it's the idea of layering things up and using that lawn as kind of the canvas, as that ground cover. Now let's get into water in our landscape, and there are a variety of ways and techniques you can use to manage water on your property. You have your passive systems, and these are green roofs, rain gardens, bioswales, and permeable paving. And we have active systems, and actively harvesting water. These are rain barrels. So let's get into some of these here. And the first one here, we're going to talk about green roofs. The best place to start planning your water resources on your property is at the top of your watershed. What's the top of your watershed? Well, for most people, it's the roof of their house. So green roof is a very important area, critical to think about. And so there's two types of green roofs. First is extensive. An extensive green roof has a very shallow planting media. This is usually used for like low-growing perennial sedums or small grasses. Usually you're at about 4 inches of substrate media. This is a picture of the Illinois Department of Ag building on the Springfield, Illinois fairgrounds, and I think the bulk of this roof is planted in these sedums, and this is again like an extensive green roof. Now it's kind of pretty, I suppose, to look at. I don't know if pretty is the right word, but it's nice. It's better than a black tar roof. But these extensive green roofs, they are not necessarily built for their ornamentality. They are built for their function. These sedums are there for their function. That gravel there is functional to hold water and slow it down and let it infiltrate and not just shed off the roof. Then we have our intensive green roofs. And this is a photograph taken on a building in downtown Dallas. And so an intensive green roof has deeper planting media. Here you can plant trees and shrubs. As you can see, this is more park-like. Sometimes they are accessible to general public, not all of them, but some of them. And so really the defining thing here is we're looking at substrate of 4 inches or more, and a very park-like type setting. There is a big ornamental appeal here, but there's still function here. There's still functioning as a green roof. So we're combining form with function here. There are a lot of benefits of green roofs. It allows us to mitigate, slow down stormwater runoff. We're not sending it all from the gutter into the storm sewer right away. Allows it to evaporate off. We are allowed to conserve energy, reduce the urban heat island effect. This is something I'm sure we're all aware of. If we're out in the countryside and we drive into town, it feels like it's 30 degrees hotter as we get out in the middle of town and step out into that parking lot as it was, out in the countryside. And it is an actual phenomenon that occurs when that sunlight comes down, hits the Earth's surface, and re-radiates as heat. A lot of plant material can help dissipate that heat, and so that's the benefits of the green roof. Increased longevity of roofing membranes. I mean, you are building a roof to hold and store water, and so you got to be spot on with your construction techniques. I really recommend, if this is something that you want to put over a home, you certainly need to consult with an architect, with a structural engineer. Even if it's something that you're going to be putting over a carport, something like that, it's still critical that you consult with some professional to make sure that you're able to support the load that you're going to be putting on there. And green roofs, they don't all have to be over a home or a office building or a parking garage. Some of them can just be out in the middle of the yard here. And so here's a picture I took on a site visit to a client, and really neat structure here. And so this is a roof that would once shed water, but now it is able to infiltrate that water and intercept it before it sheds off the roof. Next, to talk about rain gardens, and just rain gardens. Just talk about this real quick. A rain garden is a simple depression in the ground. It detains runoff every time there's a storm. So as you can see from the diagram here, we start on the right side of the image. Rainwater hits the roof, goes through the gutter, comes into the rain garden through the inlet. We've amended that area to allow it to drain appropriately. We're talking, good neighbor policy. I'd say 24 hours, but you can stretch it to 48. And then we designed for overflow for an outlet, because the last thing you want is for one of those extreme rain events to come, your rain garden backs up. Where does the water go? Well, the only place it has to go is your basement. So we always design for overflow, and so we have to make sure we have those outlets. If you'd like to learn more about rain gardens, my colleague Andrew Holsinger and myself, we did a whole webinar last year on rain gardens. I talked about the design and construction of rain gardens. He talked about rain garden plants. If you want to learn more about that, our video is up on YouTube at the U of I Extension Horticulture YouTube page. Go ahead and check that out. Learn all about rain gardens. Then we have bioswales. Now, bioswales, I essentially define them as linear rain gardens, which we use to move water from point A to point B. Or, and that's the image on the right, or the image on the left, they are using contour swales to slow water running down a hillside and allow that water to maybe not create these runnels and things that they do when they're running down hillsides, but they intersect this contour swale, slows the water down, allows it to infiltrate into the soil, and allows it to actually recharge the water table, down the topography. So bioswales, they have other different names. Diversion swale. Went to school with a guy who just called them a ditch. All those terms work. But really, the thing here is that they are sloped to convey water from point A to point B. And we want to make sure that we are moving that water appropriately. So your swale should be sloped somewhere between 2% and 8%. If you're less than 2%, then your water's not going to drain as you want it, and actually you probably just wind up having more of a rain garden than a bioswale. If you go over 8% slope, then you run the risk of your water going too quickly, and then you can get erosion problems. And just for anybody who wants to know, how do you get this 8% slope? Just go back to old math class here, high school math. Rise over run times 100 equals your percent slope. Then when you are designing your swale, it's another good thought to think like a river or stream. Water is an interesting natural element in that it seeks equilibrium, and there are bends and crooks in rivers for a reason. It's because that's the direction the water has sought, because water doesn't like to run too fast. It wants to be in equilibrium in that type of state, and so it undercuts on itself. It creates runnels and crooks in the stream bed. And so maybe not a straight line, that's probably not the best option, but allow it to meander a little bit through your landscape. And we permeable paving. Now, if you have a patio, it's probably made of some type of modular paving system. Could be brick, could be stone, it could be a concrete block made to look like brick or stone, some type of cobble. A lot of homeowners can install these themselves. However, I would say if you're doing this for a large patio, some type of permeable paving, or if you're doing it for like a driveway, something where people are going to be, moving equipment onto, you're going to have a lot of traffic here, then it's a good idea to consult a professional. Make sure you're preparing your base and all of that appropriately. Now here's just some examples taken in Portland, Oregon. This is a plaza area, permeable paving, and then we have these little pockets here where water can also go. Another example here, this is actually permeable asphalt. It looks like a plain old asphalt parking lot, but this is one where water can infiltrate into. And the way they do this is they simply just leave out the fine particles in the asphalt process. And this is done, another picture taken again in Portland, Oregon. If you're wondering about, how do these materials work in, our more northern climate where we get the freeze-thaw effects and the heaving, Cornell has done a lot of research on this, and they have had a lot of this is not new technology. This is 30 years old or more, permeable asphalt. I've also seen permeable concrete. And Cornell said that they, in the 15-year trials that they've had some of these areas laid out, they have seen no heaving whatsoever. And so a really, really interesting way to go about, parking lot layouts, or, some of these other areas where we have to deal with, asphalt and the like. Rain barrels, this is the one active water harvesting technique we'll cover here. The kind of the benefits of using rainwater for irrigation is, one, it doesn't have the harsh chemicals that well water might have that has to be softened, and maybe you don't have that chlorine like you get in a lot of municipal water. Using harvested rainwater can help lower your utility bill, because you're not going to be reducing our strain on our water resources by taking that water which the water company took. It's not potable. They use all of that energy to make it drinkable. They then pump that water to your home, and you take that water and you dump it onto your dirt, into the dirt to water your plants. Now, for some, that doesn't make much sense. So you're able to lower your utility bill because you're not using that potable water, and you're able to reduce the strain on our water resources. The other thing is, and this really goes for all of the techniques we've talked about so far with watering, dealing with water, is it reduces the burden on our storm drains, storm sewers, and the impacts on our surface waterways. The American Society of Civil Engineers rate our water infrastructure as a D-, which is equates to highly compromised. And so I think we all know that sometimes those funds are not there to replace them. So these again are things that we can do on our own properties that really help not only what's going on our property, but also the kind of the greater good, what's happening around us also. And during water restrictions, rainwater might be the only available source for irrigation. Now, the things that you need to consider, though, is that you should not use roof catchment areas that have, the old asbestos shingles, that have tar and gravel, or that have some type of treated cedar shakes. You're going to want to avoid those. Also make sure that you have your gutters checked, that they don't have any of those old lead solder or lead-based paints in them, and make sure this kind of common sense, but I've seen it happen. Do not place your rain barrel at a low point in the landscape, because unless you're going to be hooking up a pump to it, you are going to be using gravity to move that water from the rain barrel to wherever it's going to be utilized in your garden. And then if you're going to be watering, make sure that you water plant roots, not the leaves, especially edible crops. And actually, I would steer you away from watering your edible crops with rain barrel water, because if you think about that first flush that comes off of your roof, those squirrels and those birds have been playing on there before that whole rain thing, and that first flush has all of those potential contaminants in it, and so then it sits and kind of bakes a little bit in that rain barrel on the side of your house, and then you take that potentially contaminated water and sprinkle it on your lettuce, and you have problems there. If you are going to be watering with harvested water, I always make sure that you wash it off with potable tap water. I've seen rain barrels installed in a variety of different ways. One of the methods for dealing with that first flush, as you can see in the diagram here on the right, is you just extend that guttering down, and that guttering fills up with that first flush, and then you create a little L or a T out into the rain barrel. Use some type of an inlet U, helps to calm the water as it enters the rain barrel. You don't stir up a lot of sediment. You're going to want some type of overflow again, always designing for overflow, and then we're going to have a spigot, which we might hook up a hose or use to fill up a watering can. And then just something to keep in mind that if you have 1,000 square foot roof and we get a typical 1 inch rainfall, that 1,000 square foot roof is going to drain about 600 gallons of water. So one technique that you can use, your 55-gallon barrel is probably not going to cut it. You can chain multiple barrels together, or you can even, bite the bullet and get a big above ground or below ground cistern. Sustainable plant practices. And the first thing I want to do is I'm going to ask you a question, and if you want, you can type it in the chat box or just discuss it with the group you're with. First thing, though, is this a native plant? So maybe you've come to a consensus now or not, but what we're looking at here is dandelion. And the thing with dandelion is it's actually not native to North America. Dandelion is a very interesting plant. It has found its way into our landscape through uh, colonization of Europeans as we moved into North America. Uh, and yep, there you go. Tazewell County, yep, not native. So yeah, the dandelion's not native. Interestingly enough, though, all the plant parts are edible, provided you're not spraying it. So dandelion, not native. And so this brings to mind to me, what is native? What does native mean? And to me, when a plant is labeled as native, a lot of times I think of it as something in the grocery store being labeled as all natural. It's a really hard debate to sell somebody, food and claim that it is something that is unnatural. I mean, everything is derived from the planet, so how can it not be natural? And so the thing to think about here with when we're trying to determine native versus non-native versus invasive, things like that, is we have to start asking more questions. So we have to think, all right, even if this plant is native to the United States, where is it native to? So let's take oak leaf hydrangea as an example. Now I have a part in my yard. It's a part-shade corner. It's off the side of a porch, and it is kind of this proposed planting site that I'm trying to figure out what I want to plant here. Oak leaf hydrangea, I've been reading, it's often billed as a native landscape ornamental shrub. But like I said, you need to ask more questions beyond, native. What does native mean? So your next question is, well, native to where? Well, I had to go in and do a little bit more research. Is it locally native? Is it regionally native? Where is it at? Well, I found out, I'm in central Illinois. It's actually not going to be growing anywhere near me in the wild. It's actually native to the southeastern United States. So, okay. Just because it isn't locally native does not exclude the plant from use. So, I'm going to start asking more questions. Is this plant adapted to grow in my region? And will it be successful with, considering all the constraints that I have on my site? Will it be able to thrive without with minimal inputs? Because remember, we're going for sustainable or this resilient type landscape. Well, it turns out the native straight species of oak leaf hydrangea actually grows about 10 feet tall and 10 feet wide, a little too big for my space. But there is a cultivar called peewee, which actually meets my criteria for this selected space. Now, for you and your garden, there's a lot of other questions that you can ask to help refine your plant selection to ensure that it will be resilient and productive. So another question you can ask is this plant a critical food source for wildlife? Or is it tolerant or resistant to deer browsing? And how long will it take to establish? How much inputs do I need to put into getting this plant to be successfully established in the spot? And will it grow successfully with other plants that I will then be placing around it to help build a community of plants? And so when we think about plant community, the thing that really comes to my mind, I studied landscape architecture out in Kansas. I really think about the prairie, the tall grass prairie. Now, if you've ever I'm sure we might have master naturalists here on the line, or others who have gone in and tried to maintain prairie, build prairie. The thing about prairie is a lot of homeowners will say, oh, I just want these wildflowers, which, the term is forbs. I just want these forbs, and it's really pretty. Well, over time you realize, after trying to manage this pure stand of wildflowers, you need grasses there to help support them. The grasses and the forbs have evolved together to form this plant community. They work together in symbiotic relationships, and so it's really important to have the two within a landscape. So another thing is I want to talk about here is the idea of biodiversity. And I'm going to use our Illinois state tree, the white oak. That's what's pictured here. To relate how certain plants can be used to support a diverse wildlife population. And the thing about oaks, I'm going to actually take this from Doug Talmey's and Rick Dark's book, The Living Landscape. And they've done a lot of research here on oaks and various other plants out there, and the wildlife populations that they support. So what they said in their book, so they said in the mid-Atlantic states, which is where they're at, native oaks are the most productive plants because they act as a host for 557 species of caterpillars. That's butterflies and moths. So the loss of oaks from an eastern deciduous forest would trigger an immediate and destructive drain of species from that ecosystem. Oaks are kind of one of those keystone plant species that provide an abundance of diversity in the landscape because there's a lot of different species that can utilize the oak. Everything from those butterflies and caterpillars to some of those four-legged animals out there, squirrels, raccoons, and deer. They all can rely on this plant. The thing, though, if we can move through the food web and see how oaks can affect other species that you might not think are directly related. So if we use the Carolina chickadee as an example, I'm going to pull again from Talmy and Dark here. My question for you is that how many caterpillars are enough to produce a clutch of chickadees? Now, a majority of songbirds, we think, well, we just feed them seed and then they will survive and grow. But actually, most songbirds, 90% of them, feed their young protein. And the only a suitable source of protein is that of caterpillars. And so how many caterpillars are enough to produce a clutch of chickadees? And if you want, feel free to type in your guess into the chat box. I'll wait just a second here, maybe take a drink of water. Well, Kendall County, you said 600. That's not bad for an average day. 75, no. 150, not quite. Actually, the Carolina chickadee brings in somewhere between 390 to 570 caterpillars to their nest each day. So depending on however many chicks are in the nest, parents are going to be feeding their nestlings for 16 to 18 days before they fledge, and then they are going to continue to feed several more days after fledging. So if we just focus on the caterpillars to reach the fledging stage, and we extrapolate that 390 to 570 throughout that time, we come up with 6,240 to 10,260 caterpillars to fledge a single clutch of chickadees. Now that is an amazing number. So what happens if, we only have 5,000 caterpillars? Just enough or barely enough is not going to be enough if we want to sustain wildlife populations of songbirds and other wildlife out there. So it's really important that we start to see these relationships out in our landscapes because they are critical. And as we talked about before, habitat loss is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. So oaks, maybe you didn't know that about oaks, but a really neat fact about oaks. The other thing to think about, chickadees only weigh like 4 ounces. That's like 4 pennies. You know, how many caterpillars do you think it takes to feed a larger bird, like you know, larger woodpecker or something like that? It's interesting to think about. Now, there are other plants out there, other ornamental plants, and I am a huge advocate for oaks. And you know, I realize that as a gardener, and you, my fellow gardeners, you are willing to probably embrace natives, but not exclusively. I mean, there's other things that I want to grow besides natives. And after all, there are some non-native plants that work very well in the landscape. So let's look at Ginkgo biloba for a second here. It was a tree that was rediscovered in Asia. And it actually, you know, long time ago, it was in North America, but hasn't been here for a while. So it is considered a non-native tree. And the thing is, though, this tree is very well adapted to our North American climate and even of our crummy urban soils and all the pollution that's there. Plus, it has that wonderful fall color. That leaf shape is just so unique and dramatic. But unlike the oak, the ginkgo does not support a vibrant natural community. You know, Talamy, he says he's been studying this for a while, and in, you know, his research comes up, you know, there's like, you know, 3 or 4 caterpillars that feed on ginkgo, but in his whole time in observation and study, he has not seen one caterpillar on feeding on the ginkgo leaf. Now, I still think that this does not rule this plant out of contention here, you know, because there's still value here. There's still something that the ginkgo brings to the equation, and that is that it is able to grow here in North America without escaping and without becoming invasive. Plus, as it grows, it sequesters carbon, it filters runoff, it helps to hold soil and reduce erosion. These are all great sustainable traits, but we just have to keep in mind the productivity of the tree. But just because a tree is not productive doesn't rule it out of our gardens, of our yards. So it's just a way to tip the scales there. There is nothing wrong. I'll reiterate again with mixing your native plants with non-natives. In fact, I think that's what's going to make our garden so dynamic and so interesting, that we have this local identity, but then we bring in these non-natives that are, you know, they're showstoppers. But there are plants out there, a group of plants that I would encourage you to avoid using in the landscape, and we call these the invasives. And some of these are not legally termed as invasive, but species that we've noted of concern. These might be commonly sold in the landscape trade, or these might just be plants that have been there for a little while and we're really starting to see them take over. So, you know, this topic here requires a whole series of webinars, which guess what we have. So actually, if you go to our YouTube page, U of I Extension Horticulture, we have just uploaded the Good, the Bad, and the Lovely series, where we talk about identifying these species, controlling them, alternatives for them, and then some good pollinator plants also. But pictured here is actually where I grew up, my boyhood home, and these were woods that I could just literally run through, you know, full speed. I would be trampling trilliums and Mayaples, but I could run as fast as I could. Now I can't. It's completely overgrown with honeysuckle, which is pictured there. This is the fruit of the Japanese barberry. Another, not necessarily legally defined invasive, but a species of concern and one that we are looking at. The one tree or shrub that I think most of us have in our yards, the burning bush, Euonymus elatus, winged euonymus, brilliant fall color. But we're seeing this pop up in natural areas, and it is a non-native. And here is another one, again, not necessarily legally invasive in the state of Illinois, but we are seeing more and more ornamental pears. escaping cultivation and popping up in natural areas. So again, these are species of concern, and we just want to make sure that we are getting the word out that you're keeping your eyes out as well. So how are we going to put all of this information together? How are we going to design these sustainable landscapes? Well, Doug Tallamy, Rick Dark again from the Living Landscape, they developed a series of layers which we can use to assemble our landscapes to be biodiverse and sustainable. And here are how they define or laid out these layers. We have the ground layer, the herbaceous layer, shrub layer, understory layer, canopy layer. So let's hit each and one of these. So the first one here is the ground layer. And I want to let you know that turf is still a viable ground cover and should be used as pathways, as spaces that are defined by our planting areas or by our buildings, like a play area. And our landscapes should define our turf, not the other way around. So turf, again, still a very valuable ground cover, one that we should use. I mean, it's better than bare dirt, which would erode and cause lots of problems. The ground cover layer is comprised of everything living and unliving, and the debris or detritus on the forest floor is just as important as the ground cover, the living ground covers that are there. And you can utilize native ground covers. And in the woods, I see a lot of phlox blooming right now. We also have ginger. We have Solomon seal. These are all plants that once they're established, they'll fill in, and they will become this canvas, which are going to then support the remainder of these taller plants, the other layers. And really, once established, your ground layer is going to become the mulch of your of your soil. The other neat thing I like watching in the spring, as in these natural areas as they wake up, is that everything kind of wakes up from the bottom up. And that's kind of what I have this image in here for. You see these lower plants here in the spring coming up, and then everything else kind of wakes up a little bit slower as you go higher and higher. It's a really neat natural dynamic out there. It all starts with the ground. The next thing is the herbaceous layer. Now this is going to be closely tied to the ground layer, but we are starting to transition upward in height, and this is often the most diverse layer. Here's where we can plan for a lot of seasonal color, as perennials come in and out of bloom, and think about, we're going to start to think about food sources and cover for wildlife here. Really neat thing is planting in masses. It will help to both create less maintenance and a bigger visual punch. Pictured here, the background is the purple flowering plant, aromatic aster, and the foreground there is large-rooted heuchera. So those are just examples of what you can be planting. There's another image for examples here. The herbaceous layer, you can see, it's not all one height. We have multiple heights here, even within this one defined layer. So we have cardinal flower, we have yarrow, Joe Pye weed. We have various plants here that are creating an impressive show, and these are natives. And then as we move up, we have our shrub layer. Now the shrub layer is, really when we start to think about defining spaces with plants. These are going to become the skeletal structure maybe of your layered landscape as we start to work our way up into the canopy. It's still another great source for seasonal color, for great texture. There's a lot of good wildlife food sources here. And then even from a functional standpoint too, for us, we can use shrubs to help screen undesirable views if we are within like a subdivision or residential area. And pictured here, we're actually in the governor's mansion in Springfield, and that is a bottle brush buckeye there on the right side. So you can see how they use that shrub as a screening device right there. Really, really neat technique, and a really great shrub to have in your landscape. Another shrub, well, I'd say almost tree here, the pagoda dogwood. A really neat one to have in the landscape because the structure of its limbs give it that pagoda-like appearance. So another really good productive tree, flowering tree out there. And then we're transitioning upward into the understory layer. Now, the understory layer, we're getting up into the canopy for the most part, and we are going to be utilizing trees like what's pictured here. This is ironwood, and I really think ironwood is a pretty neat tree. I took this picture. It was really cold in the middle of winter. I reached out and I touched the trunk of this tree, and it was cold to the touch. It was like a concrete pillar. So much like its name, it was really impressive. The other thing is, as it grows, it gets this twisting effect to its bark. Really, really neat. But as you are growing and planting your understory, think about we're planting in masses. I think one of the neatest, prettiest sights in the spring is a line of red buds in flower at the edge of the woods, and so this is part of that understory layer. So you can be thinking about fall color, berries, flowers, all of these different things. We're still designing with ornamentality in mind, but we're including that function. And then we come up to the ceiling of our garden. Now, the ceiling here, it can have a variety of textures, can have all types of colors. A critical thing, though, for the things below, it's a good idea to create openings in your canopy to make sure that the understory receives ample light. The other thing, though, the canopy does is that we can use it for shading elements for our homes, or if we have an outdoor patio gathering space. It can help us create a more comfortable environment. And again, it's a critical habitat for wildlife. Everything from the birds and in this case the bees or the hornets. So this was a bald-faced hornet's nest, which we had no idea was above our heads. It was directly above our heads all summer long. The leaves fell off and boom, we saw the nest, and they never bothered us. They're actually a really neat, a beneficial insect to have. And so here is an image of a layered landscape. I took this from the Talmian Dark book, A Living Landscape, and you can see how they put all the layers together here. We have the ground layer. We then have the herbaceous layer. We're going up into the shrub layer. You can see that white flowering tree. I think that might be a serviceberry. I'm not quite sure, though. That's the understory. And then we have the overstory. So you can see how it can really come together to create this wonderful composition of a layered landscape. There is a very similar but a slightly different school of thought out there when dealing with designing our plant communities. And this comes from landscape architect Thomas Rayner. He's LA out in the Washington, D.C. area. And I sat through one of his sessions. He came to Illinois and gave a talk. And I really connected with his approach to how he goes about designing these plant communities. And he also uses a very similar technique as Talmian Dark. He calls them layers. He layers it. But I think this was an interesting quote from Thomas. So he says, "Do not imitate nature. Instead, interpret it. Take something that you really like to see out in the wild, in nature, and then you can take that, you can put it in your backyard and amplify it, turn up the volume. You can exaggerate the natural distribution patterns of the plants. And you can create these very visually pleasing arrangements that packs a lot of punch to them." So imagine a photographer. They hold up their two hands and they create this little frame. And so they're creating this frame around the picture that they want. So the term for this here is we create these orderly frames around these plantings, and we use this to relate them to the landscape which we all are living in and a part of. So let's just talk a little bit, we're wrapping up here, but just a little bit about how Thomas approaches landscape design. And so here is a conventional mass planting of perennials. This is what is fairly typical. We're just planting in kind of blobs and strips, but Thomas, he does some things a little differently. he comes in and he applies his layers to the landscape. So what he has his four really key layers. The first one is the ground cover layer. So starting very similar to Talmy and Dark. And Thomas calls this the first of the two functional layers. And so within this ground cover layer, we have low-growing, shade-tolerant species. This is the carpet that is going to make up the space between the other layers. Examples of plants you could use here. You could use geranium or alpine strawberry. You could use sedges. Various sedges out there actually work fairly well. And then we come into the structural layer. Now, the structural layer is considered a design layer. In essence, these are going to be the plants that are going to be more dominant visually. It's the framework that are going to make these plants visually there, year-round. Whether it's a grass or a tree or a shrub, something like that. It's going to be there pretty much year-round. And they're going to be a little bit larger plants, maybe larger perennials, maybe larger leaved. And then after that, we have the seasonal layer. Oop, things are speeding up here. I don't know if you're seeing what I've seen, but my slides are jumping around a little bit. Then we have the seasonal theme layer. Now, seasonal here, these are plants that are based upon, maybe mid-height and size, and they are going to become visually dominant a certain part of the year, seasonally, essentially. It might be flowering, or a leaf texture, or a leaf color. Good idea is to plant these seasonal theme plants in a mass to give dramatic sweeps of color or texture. Examples would be aster, monarda, Amsonia, Virginia bluebells, goldenrod, are all good seasonal plants that are going to be around for a while. And then we have our filler layer. Now, Thomas says this is the second of the two functional layers. The filler layer is pretty much comprised of minor short-lived species, and they're going to fill in temporary gaps until those seasonal theme plants really become established and make the bed their own. And these would be like annuals, biennials, short-lived perennials. So we're looking at Rudbeckia, cardinal flowers, some echinacea, some gars, some fleabane. These are the filler plants. And Thomas was nice enough to send me a picture of his own landscape here. I'm just waiting for my computer to catch up with things here. Hopefully you are seeing what I'm not seeing on the slide. But there is a picture of looks like some very fine textured grasses. Those are actually Mexican feather grasses, which usually don't grow up in our Zone 5, Zone 4 area that Illinois has. A good substitute would be prairie dropseed. And so that is kind of part of the structure. There's actually a boxwood there in the background. That light purple lilac colored plant is catmint. And then we have our alliums and other things like that that are going to be coming in and out. And so I'm just going to pause 1 second here, take a drink, wait for my computer to catch up. Hi there, can you hear me now? It looks like my computer is acting up once again. Um, I'm not quite sure where you heard, but I'm going to pretend like you didn't hear that last 2 minutes where I was just spouting off information. Um, so for me, this is a quote from Rick Dark. It's one, I think it's a good one to keep in mind as we go back into the garden after tonight's session, whatever task you have to do there. In the garden, the dominant ethic is to do good, and the corollary is to do no harm. So I'm going to finish out tonight. I promise we're almost done. My computer's telling me it's time to be done. It's acting up. So I'm just going to finish with one last story here. When my wife and I, when we purchased our home, our first home, we had this really beautiful winged euonymus in the backyard. Really beautiful specimen. Our home's probably 30 years old. The shrub's probably the same age. And I decided with the amount of seedlings I was pulling out of the garden beds, and then the amount of red color I was seeing on the wooded bank behind our house that, following Rick Dark's advice of doing no harm, I think, and trying to do good is something that I wanted to follow. So, will me removing that burning bush, is it going to, eliminate all of the seedlings that are spreading out in the wild? No. But I know that I'm not contributing to it. And so I think that's one of the important things to think about as we go back into our gardens today. So the thing to think about is, if you thought that this whole program, if I'm just thinking about the birds, it's all just been about the birds, I want you to know that the thing that I was really concentrating on when I was writing this program are these two individuals. And so, these are my kids here, and I think it's important that when we set up our landscapes to become sustainable, that we are adopting a practice that is going to protect, whatever it is that's precious to us for those in the next generation. I think that is the most important part of it. As far as references go, I'm just going to skip this page here. Landscape for Life series was a great resource here. Highly recommend just going out, Googling it. It's a great website. You can take training to become a Landscape for Life instructor. It's a really good resource out there for sustainable landscapes. Also the books by Rick Dark and Doug Tallamy, The Living Landscape, and then The New American Landscape also help to inform this presentation. And then Thomas Rayner here, he's the landscape architect. He's going to have a book coming out actually this fall. I'm really excited to get to read it. He's going to be talking about building plant communities. He's really going to elaborate on just what I essentially touched on there at the end in building those planting beds. So feel free to follow Thomas if you want on Twitter, or check out his blog, Grounded Design. This is my contact information. And you can always check out recordings of these webinars on our YouTube page, U of I Extension Horticulture. And then happy to take questions at this point. Feel free to type them in the chat box, or if you can, unmute yourself and speak away. Thank you, Katie. Thanks for being here tonight. Thank you, Deborah. Lorraine and Jacqueline, thank you. So I'm happy to be on for the next couple of minutes. If anyone has questions, uh, feel free to type them in the chat box. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending tonight. And if you have any questions, feel free. You can email me.